Thanks for tuning in. We're Acecomicals. I have with me my co-host Rahul and Leon Everett. I'm Greg Driver. Let's get started. Hi guys, welcome to Acecomicals, episode 007. It's me, Greg Driver, and the usual suspects, Leon and Rahul. And again, we have stacks to talk about, or at least I do anyway. Loads and loads to talk about. Yeah, so how have you guys been?
Yeah, not too bad. It's been a busy week for me. I don't know about you guys, but I've just been so busy. We've had the bank holiday weekend, and I just spent it doing stuff and being productive, which is against every fibre in my bones. But I guess it's good in the long run.
That sounds awful. What have you been doing?
Like DIY and tidying stuff up and making plans and all types of adulty things. But the downside is it's given me less time to read stuff. So I haven't been able to really tuck into anything deep apart from pick up a few comics that I've been wanting to read for a while. But otherwise, yeah, it's been tough. How about you?
I had my parents over for the weekend, and to bring it back around to comics, like they went to a birthday party, and I learnt this word just like a month ago when we watched Logan at the cinema. But it was a nonagenarian's birthday party, and it sounded like they had a right blast. Apparently, there was loads of alcohol at that party, and it ended at 7. So I don't really know what what they all did. Just got smashed and then went home. But I got cake out of it, so it was a good weekend overall.
Nice.
That sounds amazing.
My weekend was, well, there was birthdays. There was my mother's birthday, so we went out for dinner and had a few drinks at my brother's bar for that. On Friday night last week, I went to a music festival, which was really cool, which reminds me of something that I'm going to talk about later on in this show. Kind of fits together, actually, because the bands I was watching, it all feels very Cantik, which comes
Was
up...
it really a music festival? All I saw was you going bar to bar drinking.
It's a music festival set across several bars. It's called Handmade, and it was basically £10 gets you into every venue all night on Friday night.
I guess it depends which way you look at it. It's either a bar crawl, or if you like the music, it's a music festival. But like, did you actually listen to any music?
Yeah. Saw some
any
cool
new bands?
Yeah, HTMLTD, I think they're called, which were really cool.
Okay.
And there's a band called the Dead Pretties that I quite liked, and they were
What
both
type of music are they both?
Like indie rock, punk rocky. I mean, HTMLTD is kind of it's so many influences like wrapped up into one part, so it's hard to describe that one. But the Dead Pretties is kind of like it's got this whole sort of early 80s punk rocky indie vibe about it, which was kind of nice. But yeah, this all sort of links into something I want to talk about later on in the show, because it's kind of got... This is why I'm interested in a certain comic that's on my list today. So I guess I should ask you guys what we've been reading then. So what did we get the chance to read this weekend, if we got to read anything in between being productive adults and doing cool things like going to music festivals?
Well, yeah, like I as I didn't really get too much time to feast on anything, I'll go first, and mine, oddly, accidentally, but probably purposely, subconsciously, both of mine are very female-centric. I'll talk about the first one, which is Infinite Loop. So going back a couple of weeks where we've been discussing the various bundles that have been coming out, the March one, which was the IDW bundle, one of the comics in there was Infinite Loop, which is more of your... When we say graphic novel, like it's more of a graphic novel. I think it was released issue by issue, but the way it reads, reading it as one big trade, it is sort of like one whole story in one. And like, I won't go too deep into any story or anything, but the basic premise is that it's set in this like far future, in this sort of weird society where changes in time by people going back and forward in time cause weird anomalies, and these anomalies take the shape of various things which shouldn't be there. So often it's like historical artifacts from the past, and then other times it's just some weird sort of opening that's happened in the wrong place. So you have Teddy, who is the lead character, and her job basically is she's one of like her and Ulysses, who's a partner, but he stays back at base while she goes jumping around in time trying to fix these anomalies. So it starts at the beginning with her finding an anomaly quite different. They're normally inanimate objects, but this time the anomaly is a T-Rex. So it immediately shakes things up, and without going too far into it, later on, not too far, but she comes across an anomaly who is a woman, and that completely turns everything on its head and sets the main story in motion. So this is done. I'm going to butcher these names. I've been preparing to butcher them since reading it. But it's written by, it's from 2015. It's written by Pierrick Collinet, and the art's done by Elsa Charretier, which is probably wrong. And the cover for this one is done by, for the whole trade, was done by Elsa Charretier as well as Nicholas Bannister. And it's pretty cool. It's very simple, but Teddy's sort of, her style is very sort of, like pin-up, a mix of that sort of 50s pin-up style, but also, I can't remember the name of it, but the poster of the lady with her like arm curled and a bicep, and she's wearing the hairnet, and it's like been like an icon for like women getting it done.
40s propaganda postery type.
Yeah. But she's kind of designed in that style.
Yeah.
And it suits her character because her character is very much in love with jumping around in the past.
Yeah.
Because apparently in their future, it's a bit to make things safer. They've lost a lot of the edges, so a lot of things have been. I can't remember the actual name for it, but it's basically they de-res stuff. So these anomalies, they shoot beams at them and they basically disintegrate them, like in time and space and matter. But yeah, the cover's pretty cool, and it's like her, and like it's got sort of like a light halo around, and then you've got a silhouette of a young woman behind her, and it's quite striking. It kind of has this weird sort of early noughties PC game box type vibe. Like, I'm not even sure what type of game it would have been. Maybe an adventure game. It kind of looks like that, the cover. It's very, like, the very big blocky words. But, it's quite eye-catching. I mean, straight off the bat, it does some, like, really cool stuff in there. They mess around with the form quite a bit. So you have bits where, like, the character's trying to make a decision, and then it'll go into, like, a flow chart. And often the flowcharts are quite funny, quite silly. One of them is like really early on is when the T-Rex appears and she gets a flowchart. One of the options are run away from it, and the next bit in the flowchart is, are you a raptor or Usain Bolt? And yes, you idiot. And you see sort of her thought process as she gets to what she actually does in that situation, which I thought was pretty cool. But yeah, I know it's an interesting book. It's really like hard to properly delve into it. Not particularly because it's story heavy, but just because it's got quite an interesting style, and they do a lot of stuff visually, but at the same time there is like a lot of explanation, but in a way that's not too details orientated, so you don't really get bogged down with that. But instead, I mean, the flip side of that, you get a lot of sort of skips. So I have this thing with a bunch of comics that I read from time to time where I think the pacing feels sped up in a way. So like how with cartoons,
Yeah.
I think I've had this point before, but with cartoons, it moves at a faster pace because there's less detail. So generally, like if you watch an animated film, if it goes over the, say, 80-minute, 90-minute mark, you start to be like, whoa, how long is this? Whereas with a movie, you only really get that feeling when it passes, say, the 2.5-hour mark. Well, your mileage may vary, but like, it generally has a different feel to it, and that's because like, there's a lot more detail, there's a lot more specificity with live action, but with animation, because it works with bigger actions and bigger gestures, generally it feels like the pace can move faster. But I find that with some of the comics that come across, and maybe because I've just been spoilt by writers who like dwell on the details a lot, but sometimes it just feels like, what? Like how's this character like feeling this way already? Like we're on issue 2, and this character's like faced this big sort of thing, like, and they've completely changed their like mindset and way of being. So sometimes I find that a bit jarring. And another sort of weird thing for me with this is sometimes I feel like the social commentary in it, like, it has 2 types. It has sort of a baseline one, which I think works best towards it, where the sort of world and actions of the characters work well without being like really strong allegory, and instead there's lots of allusions to stuff, and it's nice and neat. And then sometimes when the characters are talking, I'm like, this is so on the nose. It's like favorite word of this podcast is didactic, and it really is. It's like, here is the message we're giving to you, and when they do that, it kind of like turns me off.
Busts the bubble, doesn't it?
Yeah, but then when they go back to the naturalistic stuff, which they start doing later on, it's way better, and like they take like a good left direction in the middle, which I really appreciated, and it made me enjoy it a lot more, because at that point I was starting to like, I don't know, I was starting to like be a bit iffy with it. But once it took that left turn, it did go into a way more interesting direction, and it eases off the accelerator in terms of whacking you over the head with some of its themes and messages. But I was wondering, because this was originally written in French, I'm wondering if that's just a cultural difference, where obviously it's been translated, but if it's one of those things where certain phrases translated come over as like really like in your face, or
they don't work in English, so they have to find an equivalent phrase.
Whereas the original words might have been just more like thematic, and we don't have that, so it might be down to that, or it might just be down to weird up and down writing. But overall I'd recommend this. I think Elsa Charretier's work, art and colours are really cool. I just love everything has like this nice sort of like sort of crisp design, and when things are getting a bit sci-fi, the way it's visually represented is pretty cool as well, where you have sort of lines and glitches, and when things get derezzed, I cannot remember the actual word for it, but when they get like derezzed, you have weird like boxes over different like elements or body parts of it, and it'll be like X-ray or like another organ or something like that, and it looks like a horribly painful process.
Like they're peeling it back layer by layer to get rid of it, kind of thing.
Yeah, but it looks like they're not doing it all in one go, so different parts of you are being derezzed at different times.
Yeah. Deconstructing at different moments.
Yeah, but it looks horrible.
It's like total protonic reversal. It's quite
also another thing that this does that I've never seen before, and maybe it's just because I don't read enough comics, that this is the first time ever I'm reading a page, and I mean, I'm terrible when it comes to social media texting, speech, and adding emoticons. for a long time, I was very conservative, and I was like, well, I'm not using an emoticon. If I do use an emoticon, it'll be :P. Like, I'm not using those actual artistic ones. And then one day, the dam just broke, and I just became an utter whore for emoticons.
It's your fault that I'm using them, Leon.
Yeah, I was going to say.
You're the reason. You
picked... like one day...
Basically talking in hieroglyphs these days.
Yeah.
I think like the dam broke, and it's because I started to see the the hyper-linguistic benefits of them in the same way that I think GIFs in the right hands are a really smart form of comedy. I mean, we've lost a bunch of listeners because I've said that, but there you go. But like, in one of the, and it happens a couple of times, but yeah, I'm reading a speech bubble, and then a lot of the time, like, you have extra things around the speech bubble that will denote what the character's feeling. In this one, midway in the speech bubble, there was an emoticon of the character blushing. And I was like, what? What? And this it's a 1-2 punch, because this came after a page where the character says something pervy or whatever. The character, Teddy, looks at him, and what he says in his speech bubble is the troll face, like the actual troll face. Like the actual troll face meme appears. I'm like, what the hell am I reading? I mean, this is written in 2015, so this is the world we're in now. I mean, I don't know if that was translated from French. I assume they use the same emoticons and memes that we do. But yeah, that's blew me away.
I'm guessing that's like a leaves it up to your imagination type thing. Like,
well, no, it's a different way to do those sort of manga-esque, or like in the more sort of cutesy comics where they have like extra things outside of the bubble around the character, like talking about their mood. It is a novel and interesting way to do that. But first I thought, oh, this is going to be terrible. But I kind of don't mind it.
Yeah.
It's because it's kind of a universal language, isn't it? It's like you were saying earlier, like you don't know when something's lost in translation, and I have that fear a lot when I'm reading something that isn't originally in English. Like that kind of thing breaks through the barriers a little. It's kind of interesting. I
find myself wondering with stuff like that, if I read something, like you say, that isn't originally in English, like, or if I'm playing a game that was translated from Japanese to English, and I'll be sitting there playing it, and I'll be thinking, is that the original gag? Or am I even getting the original game sometimes, or I'm even getting the original, what the story, if they changed it, how much have they had to change it for it to apply, for it to appeal to me? How much have they had to alter this from its original standing? But I guess with altering it between French and English, I don't think there would be too much, because it's, France is in the West, they have the same things we do. It's not like the difference between Japan and England, for example, or Japan and America. It's not that kind of culture shock, though, is it? I know.
It's not just cultural differences, though. Like you would expect with Japanese manga and the Japanese stories and English stories. Yeah. It's also like, because if it's okay for me to move on to one of the things that I was reading, have you finished your piece on Infinite Loop, Leon?
Yeah, I did have a second comic I was going to talk about, but we could...
Well, no, because if I can jump in here, because I've been reading an Italian comic called Zero Calcare, and that's one of the things I've been thinking of while I've been reading this, is like, just how much am I missing that's been lost in translation, even though it's another romantic language. Like, how much it is up to, like, it's the difference between liberal and literal translations. And like you were talking about video games, and I've been playing Persona 5 recently, and it's got a really good translation. Like, it doesn't feel unnatural. Whereas reading this Italian comic, you can definitely feel that there's a bunch of jokes that they've tried really hard to keep in context without resorting to like footnotes or anything, keeping it within the page. But you could just tell there's something lost. So if I can backtrack a second, so this comic that I've been reading is by a guy called Zero Calcare, and that's his pseudonym. I think his real name is Michele Rec. And he's a guy that I've heard my friends talk about for years, but he's got loads of Italian comics, and he's been doing it he started off by doing web comics and daily blogs written as comics in Italian, like a decade ago. And my friends have been following him since the beginning. And he's got a bunch of novels, and only one or two of them have been translated to English. And I've been pining to read these comics for years, as I've seen like my girlfriend and her friends read them. And so I finally picked up one that has been translated to English recently, which is called... sorry, 1 second. Lost the title. Kobane Calling. And it's him... It kind of reminds me of Mouse, because it's him as an author going to the Syrian border and relating his experience of what he found when he was there. And it's interesting because I'm coming into the experience of this author right from the middle, having known in the past that my friends like him because he's such a funny guy and he's our age and he makes loads of references to contemporary comics and anime and manga and TV shows and whatnot. But this particular thing that I'm reading is it's a quite serious topic. But you can tell the underlying humor of him. And it's a weird one because I'm reading into his humor, but I've dived into his most serious work yet. And that's where the thing came in of, like, I'm not really sure if what I'm reading is his voice or it's the translator's voice. And I wonder if you guys have ever experienced that elsewhere. And it's interesting that you brought up Infinite Loop as having that same issue.
Yeah, like, I can't think off my head of any like comics, but one thing that's slightly off topic that I can think of that is with the translation of Furikuri, the anime by Gainax.
Oh yeah.
And with that, there's a lot of, with a lot of anime, especially of that time, there's a lot of localizations. But because localization like aspects where they sort of change the cultural things around, and in that, there's a lot of stuff where the actual Japanese like if you listen to the dub, like the dub is not bad at all, but the downside it has is that a lot of the references it makes are weird because I think they're trying to be accurate in the same way that the references in the Japanese ones relate to stuff from a particular time.
Yeah.
The references they use are really sort of dated and weird and don't really work. Most
of the times I've felt that has been when I'm playing games. Like if I play JRPGs, for example, there'll be certain things that come up, and you'll be thinking surely that's not the I'm not getting the original game here. I'm getting what the translator has roughly surmised is probably easier for me to digest than what was in the original, because of the the cultural differences and everything else, and the fact that the humour is so different, and it references things that I would have no idea about because it's things that I've grown up in an almost completely different world, if you understand.
It's weird because it gives me a little bit of anxiety thinking about it, just how much I'm missing. Like it's weird because this particular comic I picked up, it's weird because sometimes it's a really good translation, and then suddenly in the middle there's dropped a page that just hasn't been translated. It's really odd. Like it's 7 pages of English, and then suddenly 1 page of untranslated Italian that's been inverted for some reason. So all the blacks are whites and all the whites are blacks. I don't really understand why. I don't know if it's a glitch in what I downloaded or it's just really poor publishing, but I had to get Anna, my girlfriend, to translate it for me. And she was like, there were so many points where she had to stop and go, this is what this means. Here's the context behind this particular thing that he's saying, because the way he talks is kind of colloquial and he's quite jokey. And also, apparently he uses a Roman dialect because that's where he's from, which is quite unusual, and that adds to part of the humor. So the way that if we were reading something that had like phonetically written a thick Scottish accent or something, like how would you translate that for an Italian audience or for a French audience? And it's just it kind of like, it's really interesting that I've got someone to turn to explain these things, but if I didn't have that, I'd just be anxious the entire time reading this, thinking that I'm missing half the story.
No, I completely get where you're coming from with that. Totally. Leon, you had your second comic to talk about, just to segue back
sorry,
to you.
I interrupted.
So we can get this one in as well, because I know what this one is, and I've been quite liking the look of it for a while. So yeah, man, go for it.
The second one is the comic Rat Queens by Curtis J. Weeby, I assume his name is, who's written the whole run, and the artist is Rock Upchurch, who I believe only does the first 8. And the cover of the first of the trade for Volume 1, which is it's called Sass and Sorcery. It's done by Fiona Staples, and it's a really cool cover. It's basically the 4 rat queens facing off against this gigantic sort of lizard beast who's like halfway into a mountain, and his mouth is glowing green, about to do some sort of green fire or something, I assume. And in that one image, you sort of get the 4 characteristics of the 4 main characters, which I think is pretty cool. But yeah, like the comics itself, I mean, the very basic idea of it is that you have Betty, Hannah, Dee, and Violet, who are a team of sort of rogue adventurers who generally go around sort of cleaning up the town of like ne'er-do-wells and bad guys and stuff. But they're also quite rowdy and get into a lot of trouble with the law. So the beginning starts off with them being put on notice, and they're given a mission where basically if you don't do this, you have to leave the Palisades, which is the name of their sort of town place, where if you don't do this, you're gonna leave forever and blah blah blah. So they go and do it, and all is not as it seems, as they get attacked, and then they have to fight off against this giant troll, which is kind of cool because the main idea is they were meant to go out to sort out like goblins, and then like they end up almost getting assassinated, and they also have to fight the goblins. So it's kind of a nice sort of flip on that. But like, I really like this book. Again, it has like an irreverent humor, and it marries that with 4 very sort of individual characters, where they each, at least in my head, they each had their own voice. Because of that, I know it just felt like it was just jumping out off the screen for me, and it's very easily readable, just because like the art is really cool. I love the character design. I love the look of the characters, their like designs, especially the 4 main rat queens. I love how their like different abilities are represented. I think the actions illustrated really cool. It all comes together in a really cool way. But I mean, at the center of it, you just have this sort of silly, off-kilter humor, and it's fun to be in this sort of fantasy-esque world of monsters, elves, dwarves, like crazy like foreign gods and stuff, and just to see it all come together as this silly show. Like, see, I do it again, as I always do, as a silly sort of adventure comic. But I love it, and definitely going to be reading more of this. There's just like so many little like weird touches throughout it, like as well as the rat queens. You have these other groups. One's called the 4 Daves, and it's literally 4 dudes called Dave. You have the Brother Ponies, who are another team, and it is funny because it is sort of like watching like a Showtime fantasy show or something, where they're like there's like a comedy bent to it, but it's also everyone gets their swears and their insults on, in a really like fun and interesting way.
This brings me on to something actually that I picked up this month that you would likely on if you like this. So I just want to put a mention out there for a comic called Rose by Image, which started this month. So issue 1 was out a couple of weeks ago, and if you're into your fantasy stories with strong female leads, that's your thing.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Like comparing this unfairly, but comparing this to Infinite Loop, like any sort of like message or anything like that isn't really in your face. But what they do, they make the characters like actual people, so they feel like they've all got past. And bear in mind this is only the first 5 issues, but they feel like they've all got like pasts and histories that they touch on, but the characters act quite realistically, where it's like a character has a chance to talk in depth about their past at the moment, and that's a perfect time for them to flash back or have this loads of exposition, but the character's like, yeah, I don't want to talk about it. Not right now. Let's focus on the mission at hand. And it is really cool, and a lot of the characters have like weird sort of relationship thingies, and I mean that not just like romantic, but like friendship or like camaraderie things, where it's like we're not really the biggest fans of each other, but we do the same thing, or like we have this history that is really awkward and odd, and maybe it's unrequited in some way. But yeah, it's like I've known this was good for ages. This is one of the comics that I bought for my sister, I think 2 birthdays ago.
Yeah.
And always meant to properly dive in. Before this, I'd read the first 2 issues, but I never had the chance to finish the whole first trade. But yeah, I'm definitely going to be reading on. I think this is just such an easy pickup read for everyone, really. Like for everyone. Yeah, I mean, one thing, if I've got any negatives so far, I'd say that I don't, maybe early on it gets I don't know, maybe it's not as forthcoming as it could be on some stuff.
Yeah.
But I don't really think that's too much of an issue, to be honest. There's a lot of love for me for this Sass and Sorcery first volume.
Yeah, man. Sounds good. It's something that I've been wanting to read for a while anyway. It's something that I've been looking at and thinking, oh, that looks really cool, because I like Dungeons and Dragons, and that kind of looks like a D&D campaign gone bad. You know, I kind of want to read that.
It pretty much is, in a lot of ways. Yeah. I could hear your voice faintly commanding what was going on.
And this is why when we played D&D the other week, Leon decided to be a female warrior, I'm assuming, because he's been reading Whack Queens.
That's just me.
Yeah. I thought, as soon as I saw Rat Queens on your list, I thought, I wonder if that had something to do with it. If it's because he's been reading Whack Queens, he was inspired by the characters in Rat Queens.
No, I think it's the other way around. I was like, yeah, I've been a tough badass in a fantasy setting. Let me read about some badasses in a fantasy setting.
That's why you connected to it. Yeah, I've seen this on the shelf for quite a while. I never had a reason to pick it up, but yeah, with your endorsement, I'll check that out.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend it for everyone in this chat right now.
Yeah. So, I'm going to come on to what I was getting into earlier, basically, with the music festival that I went to. So, I had picked up this comic called Godshaper, which is Boom Studios. Issue 1's out. Well, it's last month now, April, which is when Rose came out as well. And I picked it up because I'd read about it on the previews websites, and I kind of had, quite high expectations for it, actually, from what I'd read about it, because the writer, a man named Simon Spurrier, I don't know how to pronounce his name properly, I'm sorry. But he's a British writer who has worked on the likes of Judge Dredd, he's worked on X-Men, he's done Cable, Psylocke, Marrow. Like when he wrote X-Force, it was like Cable, Psylocke, and Marrow and Phantom X. He's done so many different things. This guy's he's written a lot of stuff, and he's now writing this comic called Godshaper, and his partner in crime on this, the artist, is a guy called Jonas Goonface, who has this really like punchy punk rock kind of style going on with his artwork, and it's really there's a lot of a lot of detail. It's a lot of movement, and it just looks, really nice, really cool. And this is why, because in this comic, Godshaper, you've got this character called Na, who is what they call a shaper. What happens is, in 1958, the laws of physics go bye-bye, and there's no power, no electricity or anything like that, and everything that you would rely on, though, like electricity and things like that, it is replaced by everyone getting their own personal god. Now, these gods they're your bank account, they're your livelihoods, they're everything, basically. They do everything for you, but they're your personal god. And people trade in worship. So when you want to pay for something, so someone uses their god to make, say, hot dogs or slushies, and you want to buy a slushie, you have to pray to their god. Your god gets smaller, their god gets bigger, and you get a slushie. So it's this way the economy works. It's an economy that deals in worship. Now, this guy, Na, doesn't have a god. He's born without a god. He's what they call a no-goddy, and no one likes him. People think people without gods are weird. It's like this whole prejudice surrounding people without gods. But at the same time, everyone loves and needs him because he's what's known as a shaper. He can turn other people's gods into other stuff. He can, like, if your god's function, for example, is a camera to take photographs, and your livelihood is photography, and you need a god that can take better photos, he can modify your god to do that. No one else can. Only shapers can do that. The front cover is yellow, and then yellow background. Then on the front, you've got the sort of like a shot of the main guy kind of hanging his head a little low, looking a bit like a vagrant with a stick over his shoulder. The little sack on the end of the stick with his stuff in it, kind of thing. When you see the old cartoons of like people going on a journey or hobos, he's got like the tatty looking coat over his shoulders, and because everything that he's got, because he hasn't got a god and he can't collect can't collect money like everyone else can, or what they trade in, he can't collect that like everyone else can. He has to be paid in kind for his services, so people pay him in old clothes or food or whatever. And there's also the other main character, which is a god without a human. So he's the human without a god, and then you've got a god without a human as well that hangs around with him, and they kind of run a little racket. So while he's doing his shaping business, this god that doesn't belong to him but hangs with him anyway, does some stealing for him, basically. And the connection with the music festival is because he has this. He believes in this thing called Cantik, which is, in this world, obviously musicians and pop stars in this world will use their gods to help them make music, and it's kind of like being a pop star now and having the help of auto-tune and things like that. But he believes in Cantik, which is making music without gods. So pure unembellished music without the help of your god. It's like it's primal. It's just him strumming a guitar or whatever on stage, and it's this whole sort of like counterculture surrounding it. So he goes from city to city and he plays shows for other people that believe in Cantik, and he puts on his glam makeup and everything. He gets up on stage and he's like hitting this guitar, and the kids are going nuts for it. And it's like all the what society at this point, because it's kind of stuck in the 50s, because everything went to pot in 1958 and they're kind of stuck there. So what society would deem undesirable in the 1950s, what the people they would deem undesirables are the people that, like the counterculture, tend to gravitate to Cantik, which I guess it's basically punk rock. It's basically punk rock, and it's really cool to see it in this comic. I love it.
Sounds really interesting. Like there's a lot of
there's a lot going on in this book.
Ideas and illusions in there.
And there is.
I'm looking at the art style right now. It looks really nice. It's like it's got this strange palette, like it's pastel vibe to it.
Jonas Goonface. He's kind of come out of he's like a kind of breakout talent, really. I think this is the first high-ish profile thing he's worked on himself. I think he's worked on other stuff, but I think it's all been self-published. I don't know an awful lot. From what I can tell, I think he's been working on and selling his own stuff, but this is like the first thing he's done that's been like on a high published level, I think.
So is it just one issue out so far?
Yep, just one issue of Godshaper so far.
Okay. It's looking at the cover, it's stunning.
And what a hell of an issue it is. It ends on a nice little cliffhanger, like everything that I'm going to talk about this time. But yeah, it's some great world building in the comic. The artwork's stunning, and it's a great world to be in and jump into. And I want to know more about it. I like this idea that people have gods and gods do things, and there's people that can repurpose those gods for you, because there's no electricity or anything else. You rely on your god for everything.
Yeah, that god that hangs around with him is super cute.
Yeah, that's the god without a human.
Oh, and one thing before you move on, the stick that he's carrying with the little sack tied to the end.
Yeah.
It's called a bindle.
A bindle. Ah, okay. Now I know. And knowing's half the battle. Speaking of which, I'll get onto that later. But so yeah, everybody should be reading this. Definitely recommend it to you. So pick up issue 1 because it's only one. You know, it's like it's you're there at the start. Get in at the beginning, guys. And yeah, so like out of all the things I've bought this month, I had like 3 top picks, and this is one of them. And this is probably number 1. Maybe not number 1 actually, because maybe there's something here that I would put. Yeah, there is definitely something here that I would put above it, but that's just my personal preference because I like things that are a bit more. I like things nuts, and this is cool, but it's not nuts in a Greg way. Next thing I guess I should talk about is a comic called Redneck, which is on Image Comics. Front cover, it's blue and red, like the rest of the comic. There's this whole sort of like blue and red palette theme to it. Like everything is coloured in blue, red, white and black. There's no other shades. It's all various shades of blue, red, white and black. And it kind of mimics the night sky going from night to dawn as you go through the book. But the front cover carries this palette, and it's a close-up of a dude's face with a mustache and everything, and he's very messily and viscerally biting into a barbecue rib. But you can see he's it is. You can see he's got these like vampire fangs like peeking, so you get kind of an impression of what this book might be about. I mean, when you first look at this front cover, you see him biting into that meat, and you think, is that human? You know, you look at it and you think maybe this is like, because it looks very, I don't know, when I read it, it invokes cannibalism. When I look at this front cover, it says to me, this dude's a cannibal, but he's not, he's a vampire.
Human gristle.
Yeah, as you find out as we're looking through the book. Basically, there's this family of vampires, and they're in Texas, and they are trying to stay under the radar, because you get the impression that in the past they've been hunted. They've lived through centuries and centuries of stuff. The main guy who's narrating it from the start is talking about how he was there at the Alamo, and he was born before Texas was even, Texas. And he lived in Texas when Texas began with a J, he says, which is obviously before it was Texas. And he's been through the American Civil War, and then he's sitting there on the porch now, and he's swigging a beer, and then he gets interrupted by his, I think it's his niece. It's his niece, and she's a vampire as well, and she's got psychic powers, but he doesn't know that she's listening to his thoughts, and she just all of a sudden comes out with a question. So when he starts talking about the Civil War, she interrupts him and goes, "What side?" And he basically makes him fall out of his chair and drop his beer everywhere, which is hilarious, because he's like, "You shouldn't do that, you shouldn't listen to my thoughts," kind of thing. It's quite funny. But yeah, he's, and they've got the typical sort of like southern dialogue down and everything else, which is really cool. And the beer that they drink is made of paint thinner and cow blood. It's hilarious. It's great. But although as funny and kind of nice as the beginning of this book is, knowing that they're vampires and they've probably done terrible things in the past and they're now trying to get away from that, the tension starts to build. So there's 3 young boys that live here as well. They're kind of like young men / teenagers. Now, obviously, as we know, vampires either don't age or age slower. So Whereas the old men in the family are like hundreds of years old. These young men are in their 60s, but they look like they're in their 20s and 30s, you know? And they want to go out. It's Christmas Eve, and they're like, no, we're going out. You know, we want to go out into town. And the dad's like, no, you're staying here. You got to stay here. And they're like, no, we want to go out into town. And this is where it all goes wrong, because they head off into town and they cause trouble, or trouble finds them. And this is where it all starts to slowly go wrong. And this tension that builds up comes to a bit of a crescendo at the end of the comic, which I'm not going to spoil. And it starts to go a little bit downhill, and you get the impression that their quiet way of life, you know, draining cows and drinking cow's blood instead of killing people and drinking human blood, you get the idea that their way of life is going to come to an end quite abruptly, and they're going to have to try and, you know, fight for survival, basically, because they're going to be hunted, you know, and they've been safe from it for a while, but it's coming, and you can tell that it's coming again, because there's the warning's there at the end, and there is blood drawn, and it's a fantastic read. And like I said, when you read through the comic, it goes from you know, night sky palette to morning palette, and it's beautiful the way they do it, the way they use the blues and the reds. The writer is Donny Cates, who is also the writer of something else that I've probably raved about on this podcast before, called God Country. So it's the same writer as God Country, also on Image Comics. I love both books. Both books are southerny, Texany, and he's writing this from experience, because I think that's where his family hails from. So he's writing this from experience. He's got this down, this way of life down, kind of thing, you know.
Do you see any similarity between them?
Only the fact that it's like hard old men being hard old men, you know, drinking, sitting out on the porch, kind of thing. And like, yeah, because basically God Country is a hard old man with a sword given to him by, you know, like a sword that belongs to the gods, basically, that comes into his possession. And Redneck at the moment is about, well, I get the impression that it's these two brothers, JV and Bartlett, who are, and then there's like the mysterious patriarch elder, who's like the grandpa who lives up in the attic of the house, and I think he's got like the Nosferatu look going on, but you don't see much of him. You get kind of like a little shot of him, and he can read minds too. He's the only other person other than the daughter that can read minds. But I get the impression that it's more about Bartlett and JV trying to keep the family in line. So they're those two are the two that are kind of like, you know, we say what goes. And JV's like very hardline, you know, he wants to be a pacifist. He's like, if those boys kill anyone or those boys do anything, they ain't coming back here. Ain't having that evil in my house, kind of thing, you know. And it's but yeah, there's definitely similarities between the two books, if in the setting, because obviously this is what this guy knows, so this is what he's going to write. And I love both books; they're both fantastic. But the artwork in this is absolutely gorgeous. It's got like this kind of like tense, dark, you know, realism about it, as well as being, you know, still a comic book. And this way they use the colours in it is just, yeah, I love it. It's fantastic. Moving on from that, last one for me this month, of my picks out of this month's pile of stuff. It's a comic called Namwolf. So we've gone from vampires to werewolves, two classic staples of American horror and whatever else horror. So
I see a theme, Greg.
Yeah. Now Namwolf is the crazy book. Namwolf is about a kid who gets drafted to fight in Vietnam during the Vietnam War. And when he gets to Vietnam, he finds out he's a werewolf. It's
bad luck.
Some of your favourite books always start off this way. X happened and suddenly Z came out of nowhere. It sounds great. Tell us more.
No, it is fantastic. It's brilliant. Do you remember when we had that, like, we were like just having a conversation before, Ray, and I was talking about like, what if Wolverine went to Vietnam? If we had a comic where Wolverine was in Vietnam? Well, I think we've got it now. I think this pretty much sums up like that part of it. It's kind of like Wolverine, obviously Wolverine and the Hulk, because when he turns into the werewolf, he doesn't remember any of it. But basically, he gets drafted into Vietnam, and he's like this. The narration in it is like, again, the narration's like spot on because it's done in this kind of like American way, you know, using American slang, like, oh, you know, the kid was like a $1.25 soaking wet, had no business being in the Nam and all this stuff. And then like and you know, you meet his teammates and they're like, you know, like this is the best damn man that he ever met, and it takes you through the people that he was put in a squadron with. But before he leaves to Vietnam, his dad gives him a letter, and his dad's like, you'll know to open it, you'll know when to open it, you know, just open it when the time's right. And he's like, okay. And obviously he doesn't know anything about this, but then like there's a woman there when the bus pulls off, and the woman's like, I'll pray for your son, sir. And he's like, don't pray for my son, pray for everyone else. Because obviously the dad knows. Obviously werewolfism runs in the family or something, which we don't find out yet. I mean, we get a little bit of flashback, kind of the impression he's probably turned into a werewolf before. But anyway, so he's there one night and they're all sitting around the campfire, and you know, he's got like the typical, you know, like the stereotypical Vietnam characters from stereotypical Nam war movies, or like kind of like, it's got like this kind of grindhousey feel about it, and there's these grindhousey type characters in it, like what are their names? The hippie is called Burnout, you know, and that kind of grindhousey humor and that kind of grindhousey stereotyping with the characters, you know, it's great. And you've got Geronimo, who's like this Hispanic guy who was mistaken for an Apache when he signed up, so they all call him Geronimo. And it's the artwork is absolutely gorgeous, but the way it's written is very grindhousey. And then they're all sitting there one night, and he starts feeling ill, and they're like, oh, you know, he's such a weak little kid, he's got no business being here in Vietnam with us, because he's, you know, why did he get assigned to us? We don't want it. They're kind of like, you know, discussing like, you know, he's too weak for this, shouldn't be here, kind of thing. And you know, and they're all like, oh, lay off him. And then all of a sudden, like, hell breaks loose. The Viet Cong show up, and he's actually feeling ill because it's a full moon and he's turning into a werewolf. So he hits werewolf mode, gets big, furry and clawy. The violence in it is like, it's visceral, but at the same time it's comic and cartoon, but then it remains like fairly grounded. So the violence looks like proper violence, like it's really like graphic, and imagine like something really cartoony, but then with really graphic violence. So a cartoon holds you like, but when its head gets blown off, and you see it in graphic detail, full gory brains everywhere stuff, you know? It's like that, and it's fantastic. And there's a bit where he puts his like big werewolf claw through some dude's head and slices the head into like different chunks, and it's just like, but when he turns into a werewolf, he's still using his machine gun as well. So he turns into a werewolf, runs up to he's like using his machine gun, and then he kind of turns on his own team a little bit when one of them turns on him.
Greg, is this an actual comic or a weird fever dream you had?
This is a comic. It could have been one of my. It could have been one of my fever dreams. It's the kind of thing.
Stole it from your head.
They did, yeah. They did. They've got some kind of device planted in me or something, because this is the kind of thing that I come out with, or, you know. But yeah, no, he's I genuinely love this book, and I've been raving about it on Twitter, and it's great.
You have been talking about it a lot.
Yeah. But yeah, it ends with a cliffhanger, because I get the feeling that the Viet Cong are going to have their own monster. But we'll see what happens next time. So yeah, Namwolf. Read it. Werewolves, cool. Vietnam, grindhousey. Redneck is vampires, Texas. You know, family feuds, and Godshaper is punk rock. So, you know, punk rock spirited away. Just read them. Yeah. Anybody else got anything else they wanted to mention before I go into my?
Yeah, there's one comic I forgot to talk about because I kind of fucked up the order of things earlier. So sorry about that.
Yeah.
But I read a comic called "They're Not Like Us."
Yep.
Subtitle "Black Holes for the Young," and so you can immediately tell it's slightly pretentious. So it's written by Eric Stevenson, who is the editorial head of Image Comics.
Yeah.
So it's like his own thing that he started. And basically, the easiest way I can summarize this is imagine the X-Men comics. Imagine if Professor Xavier was a sociopath and all of his mutant underlings are selfish assholes. That's basically this comic book. except it's kind of like it's quite grounded and a little bit morose. It starts off with the lead character, whose name is Sid. She's about to like throw herself off a hospital roof, and then does it, and she wakes up in the hospital, regretting what she's done and being helped out of being stolen from the hospital by this mysterious smoking man, like a really well-dressed guy who comes into the hospital smoking and steals her out of there. It turns out she was jumping off the roof because she's a telepath. She can hear voices, and all this time for her entire life she believed that she was crazy and nobody would believe her. It turns out there's more people like her in, usual mutant X-Men style fashion.
Sorry to interrupt you there, Ray. Is this a comic or an X-Files episode? Because you mentioned a mysterious smoking man walking into a hospital going after a telepath.
Well, it does kind of remind me of like one of the cheesier episodes of X-Files.
Yeah.
But if it was written by, I don't know, like an angsty teen or designed for angsty teens. Because the whole thing is like, when I said Professor Xavier being a sociopath, the smoking guy, his name is The Voice, and he is also a telepath. Or it's not quite clear what his power is, but he has some ability to stifle the voices in Sid's head, and he brings her away to what he calls a safe space. So he has a mansion, but it turns out it's not a mansion that was inherited. He stole the mansion and the house next door to it, and all of the stuff inside the mansion is stolen. And so he introduces Sid to all the other inhabitants of this mansion, and they're all just like her. So, runaways who were shunned by society because people didn't quite understand what their mutant power was. Or it's not a world where people are aware of mutants. They're just it's perceived to be crazy people who, don't deserve a place in society. And basically every single one of these characters is an entitled asshole. Like, it's like if the X-Men, but a mutant without a cause. Like, they don't have a particular thing to fight for, so they fight for themselves. So they go out and just steal and rob from people to fuel their own lifestyle.
Okay.
Because they feel like society owes them.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a weird thing where, so there's a character called Moon.
Yeah.
And she's the one who can create illusions. So we see them go out as a group into the street to test Sid's abilities when the Voice takes away his suppression. And she falls to the ground, and at the same time they encounter somebody who'd been staring at them, and it turns out he was a convicted pedophile. So they use her illusion to basically beat up this pedophile, but make everyone else in the crowd think that he's playing the guitar. And now that's one thing, because it feels like an acceptable target, but at the same time they go around attacking just random people in the street for the pettiest of reasons. Like, they mug guy, so they beat him up and steal all his stuff to fuel their own, to steal his credit cards and to steal his things, purely because he wore a pair of vintage headphones, and they just didn't like that about him. And so it's about the protagonist that we follow, called Sid, who's being dragged along on this like kind of adventure with this weird, colorful cast of violent characters, but not quite being comfortable with it. And I think that same discomfort translates to us reading it, because I didn't like any of them, but you get a sense towards the end that it's leading to something more, and there's something sinister going on in this mansion with this character of The Voice, and how he's got all of these other mutants on his side and doing these same terrible acts and requiring sacrifices from them for this safe space. And it's interesting. I'd recommend it if you want to see like a flip on the standard X-Men tropes.
Yeah, no, that sounds fairly interesting. Actually, that sounds really good. Yeah, so I mean, wow, a lot of things we've read this month.
Yeah, we started off saying that we hadn't had time to read anything, but it turns out we all did find space to cram in at least one big story. Yeah,
I mean, I've got there's the usual like list of stuff that I've been reading. So I mean, things as like still following Curse Words, getting the X-Men comics still, because they're doing like the True Believers X-Men books, so I'm getting those, which is like Marvel reprinting stuff, but they're reprinting like cool comics, and I quite like it. So still following All-Star Batman, obviously still following God Country, I've already talked about that. I've been following Underwinter still. I picked up the first issue of Batman and the Shadow. So does anyone remember a movie called The Shadow?
No, refresh my memory.
Comic book, he wears a red scarf.
I remember
saves
that.
people, has them in his debt. It's like a crossover between Batman and the Shadow. It's like Batman versus the Shadow. Still following Thanos. The Old Guards. I picked up a comic called Dead Orbit, which is an Aliens comic, which I'm going to talk about in another show. Turtles, the usual stuff. It's just so much stuff that I usually buy. Like, my stack is just ever growing as always. And yeah, so I'm buried under comics, but it's great. I love it. I love being buried under comics.
Slowly digging your way out.
Yeah, exactly. Slowly.
It's been 2 weeks.
So you're reading my way out. I mean, this week I'm getting This week I'm looking forward to, because when this comes out obviously on New Comics Day. So this week I'm going to be getting another issue of Ghostbusters 101 and another issue of Extremity, which are both fantastic books that people should be reading. I've talked about them on previous shows. And I've actually dropped a couple of things from my stack, which I'm sad to say, but I had to, which is like, G.I. Joe and Mask. They kept letting me down. But, there's a load of new stuff coming in summer, and it's Free Comic Book Day on Saturday. So Saturday, I'm pretty hyped for that. I'm going down to London to see Ray and Leon, and we're going to go and have a walk around the London comic stores to see, kind of stuff's going on Free Comic Book Day.
Can't wait.
Yeah, it's going to
we're
be
going
cool.
to be kicking kids out of the way to steal their comics. It's going to be awesome.
But yeah, I quit Mask and G.I. Joe because, they were letting me down, and then I realised they were bad comics, and knowing is half the battle. So...
Yeah, and it's a good lesson, because often you can get attached to characters or something, or be like, it might get better, but constantly we're always talking about the stack. There's like a million things on both me and Rahul's lists. There's just not enough. There's too much good content out there to waste your time reading stuff that isn't satisfying.
Exactly. You. Why continue reading something or wasting time with something that you're not enjoying? I mean, obviously people out there will still enjoy these comics. I'm not saying that they're bad for everyone, because people might like these books, but for me they just weren't my cup of tea anymore. And I'm a fan of these, the old cartoons, retro toys, stuff like that. The reason I started buying these books in the first place is because I used to like the Mass TV show, and I used to watch G.I. Joe as a kid, and I quite like, retro toys. I like 1980s toys. I think they're cool to look at and display and things. But they just let me down. These books just totally let me down now. And I'm just like, you know what, no more. I can't, as much as I'm attached to these franchises, I can't keep spending money on things that I don't like. So I'd rather...
Yeah, there's nothing to...
Yeah.
Well, there's nothing to say that you can't, like, in 10 years' time, go back and just whiz through them all at some point. So that,
Yeah.
Yeah, you spend your time currently reading the things that you enjoy.
That's it. I'm going to spend my money on the stuff I want to spend my money on, like Godshaper and Redneck and Namwolf and all these other amazing comics. So yeah, and I guess unless you guys have anything, let's just say that wraps it up.
Yeah, I've got nothing more.
So guys, support your local comic shops. Get down on Free Comic Book Day. Pick up your free comics. There's loads of cool stuff, including a TMNT comic, which I'm very excited about. Which is the main thing for me, to be honest. But this is the main reason I'm going. But yeah, get yourselves down to Free Comic Book Day. Check out what's going on at your store. Different stores put on different events. It's worth doing it. It's worth getting out and, support your local comic shop, because we need them. They're there for you.
I'm looking forward to it. I have no idea what I'm going to pick up, so it's going to be holistic. I'm just going to close my eyes and run my fingers against the covers.
See what you're going to end up with.
Let a comic pick me.
Yeah.
I'm going to stick my hand in a jar of jam and just grab whatever sticks to my hand.
Do that in Forbidden Planet, not Orbital.
Definitely not.
I'm gonna walk in and then not be able to walk out again. I'll be encumbered. Too heavy to.
Whoa, okay.
too heavy to move.
Well, I misheard that for a second.
You misheard it?
No, over encumbered. I got it.
Yeah, over encumbered. So this has been Ace Comicals. You can find us on Twitter at Ace Comicals. You can find us on Facebook, Facebook Ace Comicals. You can find us at www.acecomicals.com. You can find us on your favourite podcast apps. We like to use Pocket Casts because that's the one that we know, but I'm sure there are other podcast apps you can find us on. You can find us on iTunes under Ace Comicals, and you can get in touch with us at acecomicals.gmail.com. you can get in touch with me on Twitter at Bato or at acecomicals. I'm sure you can get in touch with these guys through the Acecomicals channels as well. So if you have a question you want to field to us, ask us anything. We'll feature it in the next show. If you ask us a question, we will answer it. Ray, where can we find you?
On Twitter at Monkeh, so that's at Moonkeh.
And Leon, where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Leon Everett. And just before we sign off, by the time this goes up, you should find a nice image of the metal cast Michelangelo that Greg bought me. I think it was off air when I related the story, but when I was in primary school, some douchebag stole my Michelangelo. So Greg here in the story became a hero, and right to the wrong 2 decades after it happened. So yeah, I'm very grateful for that. And once I'm all set up, it's going to sit proudly on my shelf.
Everybody needs a Michelangelo. I can't stand people I can't stand stories like that. It's like when my little brother, like when he was a kid and he got his Pokemon Silver cartridge nicked at school, or so. I think it was Pokemon Silver he had nicked off him. And it's just like, the injustice of it all, you know? It's like, that's Michelangelo. Everyone needs a Michelangelo. I think everyone should have a Michelangelo for sure. Yeah, that's been Acecomicals. Acecomicals over and out. Thanks for listening.